After many years in production that had begun since I think either 2018 or 19, around the beginning of 2026, the documentary An Unlikely Fandom, The Impact of Thomas the Tank Engine by Brannon Carty had finally been released. First on Typhoon On Demand, and just a few days ago was just uploaded on YouTube. And now I think it was kind of for my time to talk about my thoughts on the film itself, since I have a little bit of some Thomas and Friends content on the channel, although this is prioritized Macy's Parade. And how much did it impact on me a little bit. So, before I give my thoughts on the movie, talk a little bit of my context a little bit for how Thomas kind of a little bit an introduction to me a bit, because I did obviously watched a lot of Thomas obviously when I was a kid, especially throughout the 2000s. I collected a lot of the Wooden Railway merchandise primarily, and I brought these up from my attic here. Obviously, one of my Thomases I have, as well as Annie and Clarabelle. I should have gotten my original OG Thomas from 2001, but obviously I have like the 2003 versions of Annie and Clarabelle, and not like the original versions of them. So, and like this Cole's Thomas that just came out last year, which very looks like the balloon that was in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, to be precise. Which obviously I had done a video on the history of the balloon in my original Macy's Parade series. I used to have a lot of the DVDs and VHSs when I was a kid, which obviously not anymore, but I do have like the Blu-ray of Thomas and the Magic Railroad somewhere in the bottom shelf here in the other end of my Blu-ray collection here. And obviously, like a lot of the books I had went through, and even renting out a lot of the DVDs and videos that I did not own personally at like a movie gallery, a Blockbuster, or even at my local library. Just seeing all the Thomas Wooden Railway stuff like around a store called Learning Works that was in my area, and obviously Toys R Us, and what was at my local train store. I mean, and obviously throughout watching a lot of the contents now on YouTube is just like some of the most entertainment things I would had experience with. So yeah, so obviously Thomas really meant a lot to me. Of course, when I was a kid, obviously. This movie, obviously, An Unlikely Fandom, looks at the adult fan base of the series, specifically those who did grow up watching specifically the classic era of the television series, seasons 1 through 7, and how much they impacted their lives on how they ended up becoming a big, massive fandom, thanks to the powers of today's status, with not just with merchandising, but especially with social media, especially platforms like YouTube, of some of the other passions that they would later get involved with, such as like filmmaking, model trains, or even real life trains in general, or like even going to like massive events together and stuff like that, and how much some of the people that worked on like either like the show or even the books, they would have, are amazed that they have a massive impact that the fans would have on them today. So going on to the synopsis of the film itself, obviously this is not the very first documentary that is centering around a big like iconic children's or preschool show, to be precise. Like there is the two Sesame Street documentaries, I Am Big Bird and Street Gang. There was the two-part documentary on Barney, I Love You, You Hate Me. Obviously, the Fred Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, and the Wiggles documentary, Hot Potatoes. I think that's what it was called. And unlike any of those ones, maybe with the exception maybe of I Love You, You Hate Me, this obviously does revolve around Thomas and Friends, but not much on the show itself. It does go, like, I think in the first 10 minutes, a little history, a little bit of where the franchise began, started with the Railway series books, and the television series that would even lead into some of the bigger aspects like Shining Time Station for the United States. In fact, some people who obviously knew a little bit about the origins of Thomas, obviously who worked on the TV series, were also interviewees as well, including Veronica Chambers, the daughter of Wilbert Audrey, the man who created not just Thomas and Friends, but the author of the Railway series books. that her brother Christopher Audrey would follow suit. But you also got interviewees from some of the other people who worked on the show, like Michael O'Donnell, the original one of the original music composers, Abby Grant, who was a writer on like a little bit in the later like hit era of the show. I'm assuming, I'm not 100% positive, and Rick Sicklecole, the co-creator of Shining Time Station, the U.S. PBS show that brought Thomas to the United States. But then you also got other people like Nicholas Jones, the producer of the Thomas the Tank Engine Man TV documentary back in the mid-90s, with some archival footage from that documentary, with some archival interviews like from Britt Allcroft, the original creator of the TV series, the late David Midden, and Christopher Audrey. That kind of just sums up a little bit like in about like the first 10 minutes or so. And then that's when we get into like some of the origins of some of the most notable fans that have been interviewed. Like you have a little bit of the director himself, Brannon Carty, with I believe some actual real life home video footage, I believe filmed by his parents, of his experience, how he got into Thomas, as well as some of the other fans that we would see. I forgot some of the names, but I know one of the big ones is Matt Mashad, also known as Enterprising Engines 93, on how he got a little bit introduced to Thomas, but then years later, it really made a part of his life. Not his entire life, as he said near the end of the movie. So, going into a little bit of the fan aspect of the movie itself, it really just shows how much there is a lot of positivity that it comes to a certain fan base a bit. I say somewhat of a positivity, I'll explain a little bit. And when we see throughout this footage, we get to see a lot of massive fan events that from some of the massive older fans across around social media, like at many different parts around the world, like specifically in the English territories of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia primarily. And they have each different types of events they do. Some of them just still do model railway events, or go to real life railways, and even some like the Tulla Flynn Railway, which did the Audrey Extravaganza, which obviously is not shown in this documentary, obviously. But one massive detail that really just shows that why many fans really like Thomas so much is not really because of they grew up with it. It's because of how it worked in a technical aspect, specifically in the television series. It doesn't go primarily in the books per se, since obviously the U.S. never got the Railway series book, so it's kind of a lot of American theme to it instead of a British theme to it a bit, because Thomas is technically British. But it obviously explains some of the unique explanations on how the show made an impact on pretty much a lot of their lives, specifically, whether it be the facial expressions of the characters, to the stories that are told in a moral, gentle way. I forgot how George Carlin called it when he was talking about this, because they were not specifically forced into with lines and stuff like that. It's told, but it's not specifically said, and it gets the audience to think. It's not in the documentary, but I think that's what Carlin said in an interview he did. And then you also have gotten, obviously, the filmmaking aspect, whether it be the model trains or how filming it would be an impact, either one way, shape, or form. You're either looking at how amazing the details the models are, or just how creative the camera is, or even the music specifically, and how the music by Michael O'Donnell and Junior Campbell really meant some people that got them into the music industry, or the filmmaking for the filmmaking industry, or even someone who works in the model train industry. And we even got a little interview with who was the head at the time of the Bachman Thomas division, Doug Blaney. And then, obviously, for the fan-making impact, it goes into a little bit of the origins a little bit, courtesy, obviously, through YouTube, as we see some retro Thomas videos that are shown. Most notably, Thomas blows his stack. Just hearing that classic, old-style boom sound that you would hear in an old mid 2000s computer. And this was also around when some episodes of the show that you were not able to find on like home video or DVD or even on television showing up on the platform. And other retro videos I saw one of who was then Miss Oliver and Blossom, of an intro to one of his series, as well as like a couple of other ones from like Thomas the Bachman Engine, or something called Spark Shot, and then even some of the origins of some of the early websites like the Soldier Island fan site or the Real Life of Thomas the Tank Engine. Not much on the Thomas Wikia though. That was a little bit more later on, but like explaining a little bit the origins of the impact of how some of those really managed to do that. And I've have witnessed seeing a lot of some of those old Thomas videos during the early years of YouTube, obviously, like not just Thomas Blows the Stack, but like Leomka Video's Mad Bomber episode. Obviously, TNF and Tommy Thomas and Friends, even though they were not supposed to be in my demographic, especially the latter one, because there were some swearing. And then you also had, like, there was so many compilations of a lot of Accidents Will Happens videos, especially, like, either in 3D format or in Trackmaster format. Thomas Wooden Railway, a.k.a. Kikray24, with his Wooden Railway series, was, like, that show, like, and his content is, like, he is obviously one of my favorite Thomas content creators out there, although he has not made a video in quite some time, though. And obviously, we have some big, massive, more new impacts with a lot of other YouTubers in today's standards, like the Unlucky Tug, for an example. And obviously, we see, like, how the progression some of them have gone through, especially with Matt Michaud with Enterprising Engines 93. I mean, I remember, like, watching, like, some of his very old, like, videos when they first started to come out. And now seeing where he is now, as like, this is not just like somebody who is just filming this is just like he is filming this for a passion, and everyone has a passion for it. And that's another thing that really kind of stood out to me, is the passion they have. Like, not really much with Thomas, but like having Thomas part of the passion they're part of, whether it be obviously the filmmaking or model things and stuff like that. And then there is a little bit in the movie that does talk a little bit about, obviously, the autism spectrum, a bit of how much some of the fan communities are in the spectrum. Like, I myself, I have Asperger's syndrome, of course. And seeing that have a little bit of a nice detail was pretty unique as well to me. Obviously, this is not the first time a documentary has talked about the life of an impact of an autistic child. That was the 2016 documentary Life Animated, where it looked at a couple of, like, a young man's impact, autistic man to be precise, on how Disney animated films made a big impact to him. And there are a couple of multiple people that are in the spectrum that are in this. But I'm kind of glad it's not like, it's just like summed up in a short manner instead of like a long manner, because it didn't really need any explanation. It just needed like just kind of like one big like 5 minutes or stuff like that. And I think that kind of did work a bit well. I also forgot to mention about the prop ideas as well, with like some of them reserving some of the props they've had, and like how some of the fans had like 2 of them have to basically try to restore it the best they can with some of the props that they have owned. And it's pretty unique to see some of these fans owning the possession of some of the props, and some of them have to this day. And this was before the what was it? The big online charity auction that took place, the prop store auction that took place last year. Like, that was before, like, this movie was filmed before that auction occurs. So, because this movie technically made its premiere back in 2023, to be precise. Now, if there is any problems I do have with the movie, there might be a little bit of some pacing issues, I would say, but it's not really much of a big thing. I really wish, I know that this took like a few years to make, but it would have been interesting if we would have seen a little bit more of like how bigger Thomas impacts occurred outside of the English countries, like how much of a big fandom there is in like countries like Japan, to be precise. Or like, I think we didn't even get anywhere to Canada territories, although there are some fans from Canada that are probably in this documentary, but it's primarily the US, the UK, and Australia. Like, like, there were some that were mentioned, but it's kind of a bit of a disappointment we didn't get to see, like, a bigger impact on, like, how it is on some other countries. Even though this was primarily set in, like, the English territories, as I mentioned. But it would have been interesting to see, like, a full, like, 5 minutes of, like, how much of it is to other countries, especially in Japan. Like, Japan alone, like, has a big Thomas fan base, of course. And then obviously there is also something that some of the other documentaries, preschool documentaries I mentioned that had mentioned, like Won't You Be My Neighbor, the Sesame Street ones, the Wiggles one, and even the Barney two-part I Love You, You Hate Me. My biggest problem is that it doesn't go into like how some of the fans feel about like the show itself in the today's standards that it was at the time, especially the infamous All Engines Go reboot. And I know this plush is more based on the All Engines Go Thomas, but like I said, it looks more like the Macy's Parade balloon. But also, like, the negative impact of the fan base. Like, outside of, like, some of the ones, like, saying, oh, keep it a secret, or, oh, you're being teased at school. I'm talking about, like, because there were some members in the fan base that did got some trouble. I won't say who, but there was, like, obviously one notable person in the community that was it was like during the beginning of when the movie was being filmed, there was a controversy that was occurring with one of them. Because there are definitely some fans in the Thomas community that have a negative impact specifically, and I know there is one infamous one right now, but I'm not going to go into that territory. But there is like some toxicity fan base that might be out there that might not be part of the fan base. And because some of the other documentaries that I mentioned does look at a little bit of a negative impact, especially the Barney ones, as I mentioned, because some of them are just forsaking for trolling, but there are some that might go it a little bit too far or have some problems that they have had with some crimes that, not really crimes they have committed, but more like some actions that got them into trouble. And that doesn't go into this one. And I really wish they would have been showing that this fandom is not perfect either. It's just like all fandoms are not perfect. And I feel like they should have got a little bit, having a little bit more of like a negative impact side of the fan base itself. And I really think that should have been added in there. Now, I know this is not really a minor criticism. This is just like obviously a nitpick that I think many people would say. Obviously, this movie was done before Britt Allcroft passed away, of course. And she had a little interview she had, or a message she had near the end of the film. After her passing, I really wish that would have been the last scene. And I know Matt Mashad was the one who recapped the film itself. But I think after with the passing of Britt, I felt like it kind of felt the shame that her message was not the last scene of the movie. It's not a criticism. It's just unfortunately, this movie was finished before she passed, obviously. But I really wish that would have been the final scene of the film, especially now after her passing. But I don't blame the movie on that. That's just kind of like a nitpick for myself, so it's not a criticism, I would say. As for how Thomas impacted me in my life, obviously it's not as big compared to some of the things that impact my life, like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and especially movies, to be precise. But Thomas is definitely, like, is still around. It's, like, not my highest one as it used to be, but it is still definitely right there. Like, I'm kind of starting to get collecting a little bit of some of the Bachmann model trains, obviously. I'm trying to start to get a little bit into HO a bit. I still obviously watch a lot of the fan contents and even listen to some of the songs still to this day. I have been just recently revisiting some of the classic episodes, obviously, like with an interesting compilation private playlist I have done with some of the best episodes that I kind of did, like a best of, like almost like a custom DVD or something like that. And just seeing how the passion of some of the YouTubers that are out there that have made great content creations in Thomas, with how they make their videos and stuff like that, it definitely wants to make me become a bit of a better content creator in the realms of YouTube. It doesn't have to be like Thomas. It could just be any other subject matters. And this is not just with Thomas, but any other content creators out there as well. And Brannon Carty did a fantastic job with this movie. And Is it the best thing I've ever seen? Like the best documentary? Definitely not, because I have seen a lot more documentaries. I'd still probably do prefer "Won't You Be My Neighbor" as like the best movie centering around a children's or preschool series, to be precise. But this is probably, without a doubt, the most creative one out of all the children's documentaries I've seen. So it is up on YouTube, and I do recommend it. You take a look to see how it impacts on many people, especially for a fan base for a popular show like Thomas.